All right, let's start with our Machar Asurim blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Machar Asurim. Praise to you, Lord of God, rule of the universe, who raised the bound. And then our last Sok B'divrei Torah blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us slay with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. Morris, would you kick us off with a poem, please?
Okay. Jonathan Lament. Words and music by Robbie Solomon, 1989. Jonathan, Jonathan, tell me what you are going to do. Will you follow your conscience or will you follow your king? Your father is angry and so your friend is in danger. It is a matter of loyalty. Now, which way will you turn? Jonathan, caught between king and conscience, Jonathan follows a lonely road. Jonathan, Jonathan, where are you going to go? Will you follow your conscience or will you follow your king? Life would be easy if you could stand and do nothing. But when you know what you know, it spoils everything. Jonathan, caught between king and conscience, Jonathan follows a lonely road. You try to do what's right. Sometimes even right is wrong. Oh, is it worth the price that you paid? You thought you had to fight, but you were just a pawn, only a pawn in the game. Oh, Jonathan, Jonathan, my friend, oh, Jonathan, how you have fallen. Oh, Jonathan, slain upon the high places, oh, Jonathan, fallen. Jonathan, caught between king and conscience, Jonathan, how you have fallen, oh, how the mighty have fallen. Context. This is a song, Jonathan, written by Robbie Solomon for the Jewish American rock group Safam in 1989. It is on their album, The Greater Scheme of Things. However, songs are just poems set to music, so let's examine this as a poem. Using only the words here, what do you know about Jonathan?
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to bring this back to the beginning. So some of us have prior knowledge of Jonathan, some of us do not. So let's stick to the text that we have in front of us, or that was read. Using these words, what do we know about Jonathan?
He's caught in the middle between his friend and his father, the king.
Don't know that. We know from this that he is the son of the king.
It says
Yeah, it says your father is angry, and so your friend is in danger.
Okay, I lost that. Okay. Well, what we seem to know is that there is a right and a non-right way of doing something, and it is the non-right way that the king is requiring, and the right way is the one that will supposedly help David, his friend. This does not say that what the king is asking is wrong.
It says, do you follow your conscience? If your conscience leads you to do things that are correct, rather than just obeying the king. And then you're stuck. If you have an obligation to obey your king, if you and you talk about loyalty, is it loyalty to a friend or loyalty to the king?
What else do we know about Jonathan from this poem?
He apparently perished, or else just fallen to a lower position in life, if you will.
Oh, he's slain.
Does it say slain, or does it say just say fallen?
No, the sentence before, the line before, it says, slain upon the high places of Jonathan fallen.
You're right. You're right.
And farther up, it says that he's a pawn in a game.
It says that he fought. He thought he had to fight.
Mhm.
And that he does have a conscience, or did have a conscience, which makes him a good person.
All right. How might it feel to be Jonathan based off of this poem?
What, David?
How might it feel to be Jonathan based off of this poem?
Torn.
Overwhelmed with what to do.
Yeah. Torn between obeying your parent, honoring your parent, if you will, versus doing what you think is more correct.
I know I said Jonathan was torn between his parent and his friend at the very beginning, but as we're looking at this again, it really talks about the king and his friend. And it's probably a whole other level of honoring and obeying to the king versus just the parent.
It mentions their father, but I'm sitting here thinking about Barry's comment, and he says, following a commandment or doing what do you say, what's right, following your conscience, but is it a mitzvah or following a commandment? If following that commandment being leads to something that would be not a sin or something, by leading to a situation where somebody is as a result killed. I'm reading more into it because we know that the intention is to eliminate David.
All right. Last question on this. Have you ever felt like this, like Jonathan, based off of this poem?
Hmm. Hmm. Not exactly the same where somebody's life is at stake, but between conforming to what my I want to say my supervisor, my superior, or my boss was expecting me to do, and seeing where there were definitely flaws in constructing a large concrete structure in Costa Rica, and having to report it, and whether it's my livelihood and my job, or doing the right thing in reporting it. So eventually I had to withdraw my support and report the error, because it would have resulted in a defective structure that could have collapsed and caused all sorts of problems or injuries, or worse. So that was I had to think about that and how I approached it, so I would protect myself and avoid negative consequences, both economically and legally, and certainly not having anybody hurt.
So in the vernacular, it's the difference between being a whistleblower and keeping your job in many cases.
Well, you could say that, but I felt I had, in this sense, a professional obligation as well. It's not the right thing, and no one should be hurt. So, right, you can say whistleblower and losing your job, but the degree of the damage that would occur if I didn't was beyond just. It was more important than temporary losing income, because in the long run in the profession there, then I would have been in much better stead than if something would have happened and someone would have been, first of all, somebody would have been injured or hurt. So, yeah, I'll go along with that, Herb. That's a good phrase in the vernacular rather than the professional elegance. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
All right, let's go on. So the next thing I have here is the music. I'll sing just the beginning of this song so you get a sense of what it sounds like. Jonathan, Jonathan, tell me, what are you gonna do? Will you follow your conscience, or will you follow your king? Your father is angry, and so your friend is in danger. It's a matter of loyalty. Now which way will you turn? Jonathan, caught between king and conscience. Jonathan follows a lonely road. And it goes on from there. Unfortunately, it's not able to find a recording unless you make an account on Oi Songs. But if you read music, the music is there for you to interpret, or find someone else who can. So,
voice song?
Yes, Oi Song. Oisong.com.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. If you go to the link on the Safam lyrics, then you can click and make an account, and it should bring it up. All right. Charles, would you read about Haftarah Machar Chodesh on 1 foot, please?
Haftarah Machar Chodesh on 1 foot. This is the reading from the prophets from 1 Samuel that we read on Shabbat, when the new month, Rosh Chodesh, is the next day, so on a Sunday. These are the main characters. 1, King Saul, the first king of the Israelites, wants to protect his son Jonathan by making sure that Jonathan can become the next king. David, court musician and warrior for Saul. And 3, Jonathan, Saul's son, who loves David as he loves himself. This is a Haftarah for it's tomorrow. Machar is the new month, Chodesh, because the first verse says Machar Chodesh.
Thank you. And we are doing this this week, because this is the Haftarah for this coming Shabbat. So I'm going to catch us up on what's happened to this point, the prologue, so to speak. 1, the Israelites want a king, so Samuel anoints Saul. King Saul disappoints God, so Samuel anoints David secretly. Saul gets depression, and David is brought to the palace to play music for Saul. David kills Goliath, the Philistine. Jonathan and David become very good friends, or possibly lovers. Saul puts David in charge of the troops, and David is very successful. People start liking David more than Saul. Saul gets jealous of David and tries to kill him with a spear. Saul offers his daughter Merab to David if David will lead the troops against the Philistine, so they will kill him. He only thinks that part. He doesn't actually say that out loud. Saul then gives Merab to someone else to marry. Michal, Saul's other daughter, falls in love with David. Saul offers David that he can marry Michal if he kills 100 Philistines. David kills 200 Philistines without dying in the process, so Michal and David get married.
Wait, David, I mean,
Yes.
isn't the story, well, technically it's killing 100 Philistines, but isn't the story that he's supposed to come back with 100 foreskins?
That's
Isn't
true.
that the
He
crux
didn't.
of it?
He presumably he didn't need to kill them, but they might not have wanted to yield them voluntarily.
Yeah, okay.
Saul urges his servants and Jonathan to kill David. Jonathan tips off David, who hides, and then Jonathan intercedes with Saul on David's behalf. Saul promises to not kill David. David goes back to playing music for Saul and leading Saul's army. All is well. Then, an evil spirit grips Saul, and he tries to kill David with a spear while David is playing music for him. All is no longer well. That night, Saul sends messengers to kill David while he's sleeping. Michal tips David off, and David escapes out a window. Saul asks Michal why she helped David escape, and she claims that Jonathan forced her to. David hides with Samuel for a bit, then talks to Jonathan. David and Jonathan make a plan for Jonathan to find out Saul's thinking. And that brings us up to our story.
David, I have a question.
Yes.
So if you go up, you said that, I think it's like in the first where it says that David and Jonathan are friends, or right there, number 5, become good friends or possibly lovers. Can you explain that, please?
I can. One second. So in the text, it says that Jonathan's soul cleaved to David and he loved him more than himself. And Jonathan took off, I think it was his armor or something like that, and gave it to David as a sign of their connection. So you can read it as they're just very good friends. Or you can read it as they are lovers. That's the most obvious place where that comes up. There may be other spots that are open to interpretation, but that's where that comes in. I'll see if I can find the chapter and verse for that section and send it in the follow-up. Does that help?
I think so. I just want to have a better clarification of this.
Well, I would have to, David,
Yes.
I would say though, because I've noticed over learning about the story of King David, there's a lot of people who try to say that he never sinned, and they try to gloss all over anything that he's ever done wrong, that they find an excuse for it, which I prefer the fact that he just was good at doing tshuva and that it's okay that he sinned. There's no way they would have ever accept that opinion.
Right.
But he was an adulterer.
He did a lot of things wrong, but there's so many. I mean, I don't know. I don't have sources right now, but there's
Because people don't want him to think that he was
right. So they find ways to.
And he also
But they find ways to make excuses for the things that he did.
There's a whole section in Talmud that deals with these kinds of things, and not only David, but Shlomo and other guys too, about their righteousness versus their flaws. It's Talmud even addresses these kinds of things, so it's out there. David does well by us by bringing it up, but leaving it us to explore it if we want to. But it's there to explore.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of our religion, that we have the people the people we look up to, that they sinned, and that it just shows the humanity in them, and that if we mess up, that, it's okay.
Yep. Yes. All right. Other questions about the prologue? All right. If not, Hindo, would you read Act 1, please? If you're back.
Sorry. 1 Samuel. Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow will be the new moon, and you will be missed when your seat remains vacant at the festal meal. So the day after tomorrow, go down all the way to the place where you hid the other time, and stay close to the Ezel stone. Now I will shoot 3 arrows to one side of it, as though I were shooting at a mark. Now order the boy to go and find the arrows. If I call to the boy, 'Hey, the arrows are on this side of you,' be assured and come, for you are safe and there is no danger, as the Lord lives. But if I call to the lad, 'Hey, the arrows are beyond you,' then leave, the Lord has sent you away. As for the promise we made to each other, may the Lord be witness between you and me forever."
Okay, and our context, please.
This is from the biblical book of 1 Samuel. The promise that David and Jonathan made to each other was that Jonathan would find out Saul's plans for David and help him escape unharmed if necessary. And David will be faithful to Jonathan and Jonathan's descendants. Note that Jonathan is giving up his chance to be king in order to do what's best for the country.
All right. Thank you. So let's, keeping in mind the time and that we have 3 acts to get through. Hindo, would you read question 2, please?
Rashi comments that Saul will notice that David isn't there and will ask about him. When have you noticed that somebody hasn't shown up, like it should, and checked in on them? How might it feel to have somebody notice your absence and check on you?
Thank you.
Well, generally, it feels good if you get a call from somebody and they say, "I didn't see you today or last week or for a few weeks. Is everything okay?"
Mighty good.
It's nice to be noticed and missed.
Absolutely, Al. Good job, Al.
But in David's case, it's very different. David is hiding for his safety. And if somebody is home ill and couldn't make it to shul, that's a different scenario. So I think it depends on what the situation is, whether you want somebody to check up on you or not.
Well, if someone called me because I wasn't there and I didn't answer the phone, I would hope somebody would come and check on me because I might be just lying dead in bed.
Uh-oh.
Annoyed.com.
All right. How might Jonathan be feeling in this part of the story?
Could you repeat that, please?
How might Jonathan be feeling in this part of the story?
I would think
He might
he's
feel
conflicted.
he might feel guilty because he's not living up to what his father, the king, wanted him to do.
I think Jonathan feels pretty good because he thinks he's come up with a plan to save his best friend and possibly lover. He really believes it's going to work.
Good job, Linda.
David,
Yeah.
you say earlier on that that Saul was interested in having Jonathan, follow him as king.
Mhm.
But it seems that to me that, well, Saul was very jealous of David because, he felt that, God kind of had him be successful in everything he did. And,
did. And he did.
So I just wonder if, that jealousy was more to the point than necessarily wanting his son to benefit.
You raise a good point. Let's revisit that after Act 2. But this is a good time to do Act 2. All right. Marilyn, would you read this, please?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. You want me to
Okay.
start at verse 24?
Yes, please.
Okay. David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the meal. When the king took his usual place on the seat by the wall, Jonathan rose, and Abner sat down at Saul's side. But David's place remained vacant. That day, however, Saul said nothing. It's accidental, he thought. He must be unclean and not yet cleansed. But on the day after the new moon, the second day, David's place was vacant again. So Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why didn't the son of Jesse come to the meal yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David begged leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Please let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in our town, and my brother has summoned me to it. Do me a favor, let it slip away to see my kinsman.' That is why he has not come to the king's table." Saul flew into a rage against Jonathan. "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman," he shouted. "I know that you side with the son of Jesse, to your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secured. Now then, have him brought to me, for he is marked for death." But Jonathan spoke up and said to his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" At that, Saul threw his spear at him to strike him down, and Jonathan realized that his father was determined to do away with David. Jonathan rose from the table in a rage. He ate no food on the second day of the new moon because he was grieved about David and because his father had humiliated him. Context. The next part of the story, Saul's goal is to protect Jonathan's ability to be king, but he is so caught up in the situation that he loses sight of the bigger goal.
Okay, thank you. Let's skip to question 3. How might Saul be feeling in this part of the story?
Raged.
Betrayed.
I think he may be very angry because David disobeyed him and didn't come to the meal. And I don't think he cared that much about preserving the kingship for Jonathan in particular, but only because Jonathan was his son.
Great point. Can I interject the question?
Yep.
There is another part of the story not related to David that Jonathan and his aide, his nar, I think was, slew a few hundred Philistines. I don't know, 200, whatever it was. And the army or the battalion that was with Saul was with Saul, and there was some kind of problem. I don't know. I forgot the text, but I know the circumstance was what arose was Saul declared a fast of his military and said, that nobody eats until such and such a thing happens, or until we accomplish some kind of event of some kind. And Jonathan was not there. He was busy slaying hundreds of Philistines, which was miraculous in itself. So it was common knowledge to those who knew it that Jonathan had done a great thing with God's help. It's in our Motzei Shabbat liturgy as well. When the Shabbat departs, we recognize this part of the story. And so Jonathan comes back. He's done this great deed. He eats something and doesn't know that his father declared a fast. And so Saul is ready to have him killed for violating the king's edict. And the group, the assembly, rise up against Shaul and save Jonathan. And it's noted that the people rose up and saved Jonathan from Shaul. And there was another example of Shaul willing to kill Jonathan, his own son, for violating an edict that Jonathan wasn't even aware of. So Shaul was a troubled person, and he was ready to sacrifice Jonathan on more than one occasion, at least twice that the stories tell us.
That is a good point. The food that Jonathan eats is honey. It's one of the few times when the Bible talks about honey that is talking about bee honey instead of date honey. And to me, looking at this from Saul's perspective, this seems to illustrate the challenges of being a father, a commander, and a dynastic head, where the things that you might want, oh, and just like someone concerned about your own kingship. And the things that you might want to do in one role might conflict with your goals in another role. So Saul as father, I'm willing to say, and if I need to, I'll look up some text to find it, that Saul cared about his son. Saul as dynastic head, we see in verse 31 right in front of us. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Now then, have him brought to me, for he's marked for death. So that might be Saul as father. It's certainly Saul as dynastic head, wanting to make sure that his dynasty succeeds. Saul as commander wants to make sure that nobody disobeys his orders. And Saul as person concerned about his own kingship, when he sees that his rival is succeeding in everything, and his daughter has fallen in love with his rival, and his son seems to be protecting his rival, that person is willing to kill Jonathan to protect his own kingship, as we see in verse 33.
Was Jonathan his only son? Saul's only son?
Saul had other sons, but Jonathan was the one who we see going into battle with Saul, both in the incident that you mentioned and that they die together. Jonathan is the one who is marked to be the next king. There's another son, Ishbosheth, who is lame, and that may have something to do with why he is not perceived as being next in line for the throne.
David, could I try to extend one point you made about Saul as father? Saul is bitterly disappointed in his son. He sees things in a different way, and his son, he believes correctly, doesn't value his father the way he wants to be valued. If he did, he would be concerned about what pleased his father and what purposes his father had in mind for him. But Saul sees David's connection with his son, whatever it is, and it drives him pretty. It upsets him very much, and it's hard to see it without seeing Saul as bitterly unhappy with the choices his son is making, which is not to judge his son, it's just to make that distinction. Saul really can't see that Jonathan could have a different project in mind, let alone that he would defer to the son of Jesse.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that when Saul was first offered the kingship, he didn't want it. In fact, I think he declined it more than once, as I recall. And we don't know what happened along the way, but very shortly, maybe the next chapter, the next verses, that all of a sudden he wants to hold on to this throne, and he wants the throne to go to his son. What caused him to change his mind?
Power corrupts.
Perhaps. But I've got to think something occurred during those years that we don't know about.
It may also be that there's a human tendency to avoid loss more than to seek gain. And so before he had the throne, like it wasn't about, it was less of what he was going to gain and more of, particularly in the abstract, and more of what he's going to give up and lose in terms of his lifestyle and the life that he knew. But once he became king and he had leadership and he had people doing what he wanted, what he was telling them to do, then having that taken away is loss. There may also be some sort of human instincts as far as rivalry, and like what you see. And it wasn't even like David was saying, here, I can see that you don't like being king. I'm happy to take this burden from you so you don't have to deal with it. Like, David wasn't acting intentionally as though he was seeking to become the king. He was doing what he had been asked to do by Saul and was succeeding at it, which then made Saul seem more, made Saul more concerned that David was a rival. All right, let's finish off this story. Evan, would you read Act 3, please?
In the morning, Jonathan went out into the open for the meeting with David, accompanied by a young boy. He said to the boy, "Run ahead and find the arrows that I shoot." And as the boy ran, he shot the arrows past him. When the boy came to the place where the arrows shot by Jonathan had fallen, Jonathan called out to the boy, "Hey, the arrows are beyond you." And Jonathan called after the boy, "Quick, hurry up, don't stop." So Jonathan's boy gathered the arrows and came back to his master. The boy suspected nothing, only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan handed the gear to his boy and told him, "Take these back to his town." When the boy got there, David emerged from his concealment near the Etzel stone at the Negev. He flung himself face down on the ground and bowed low 3 times. They kissed each other and wept together. David wept the longer. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we too have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord. May the Lord be witness between you and me and between your offspring and mine forever."
Thank you. All right, in the context?
The next part of the story, note that if it is safer to run and pick up arrows after the shooting has happened.
Okay, lest anybody get hurt because they see this as a biblical example of what you ought to do, I thought I would say.
Good conclusion.
My brother was an archery instructor at Camp Vermont, so I feel like I ought to make this point to all of you. All right, how might David be feeling in this part of the story?
Betrayed by Saul?
Maybe unsure of his future, but also happy that Jonathan was so loyal to him.
He's got to be quizzical and curious. He's been anointed already, and yet he's not king.
All right, keeping in mind the time, I'm going to show you what else we have here, and then we will finish up. So I have a Reader's Theater version. If you want to see this as a play, what I realized in making this into a play is that David doesn't actually speak in the story, I don't think. He's there, he reacts, but he doesn't speak. He has no lines, which I find very interesting. Then there's the entire story all together, if you want to read it in that way. And then this story comes up in the Talmud, as for a example of how Jonathan and Saul's response to each other is about the limits of rebuke. Like in the Torah, it says you should rebuke somebody, but what's the limit of that? And this story gives an example for that. And then finally, somebody else made a video in 2015, also of 3 acts, but it tells the story in video format. It's the only non-Christian Bible story one I could find. So different ways of looking at this.